Richard Blanchard was the first UC Davis librarian, serving from 1951 to 1973. He is interviewed by James Shideler, who arrived in 1945. He is the first historian at UC Davis.
We're both retired, and we both came to the University of California at Davis in the days when it was just an agricultural campus, and just before the big change started. You came before I did, I think about 1945. And why don't you tell us why you came to Davis and what you found when you came?
I came to Davis because that was about the only job available in 1945. And Davis was a small, dusty Central Valley town of about 2,500 people. And there wasn't any town north of 8th Street. 8th Street, as a matter of fact, didn't exist west of B Street, and everything out in that country was on septic tanks. And the Davis campus was not a cow college, it was just a piece of a cow college.
Right.
The headquarters of everything was in Berkeley. And there were students. They were served by an American History and Institutions requirement, a requirement for English. That explains why Celeste Wright was here. And after 1945, things changed immensely as the GI Bill of Rights funneled hundreds of eager students.
I came in 1951, and of course you were one of the first people I met here. And one day I had a letter from Claude Hutchison asking if I'd be interested in the librarian's job. And he's a very interesting man. He was, he was vice president of agriculture at that time. And as we came up from Berkeley, he told me a bit about the plans for Davis. He said, well, Davis is now just an undergraduate college, but we're going to make it a big college, focusing on agriculture, and we're going to move all of agriculture from Berkeley to Davis. And we'll do that in just 2 or 3 years. And so the prospects are very good at Davis for growth. But I'll have to say I wasn't impressed when I arrived. It was a small, dusty town. And the campus, it was pleasant, but quite small. I think there were only 1,400 students when I arrived, actually fewer than when the GIs were here.
I remember that library very clearly. It had a holding of maybe 25,000 books. And Nelle Branch was the librarian, and her staff censored the book requests that came out of the history department.
Well, the censoring part was immediately eliminated, but actually we tried to encourage faculty to read some of the pornographic works. That was the change. In any case, it was a small library. Actually, it had about 80,000 volumes when I came, and it was very inadequate. It was inadequate even for agriculture, and it had almost nothing for the new departments that were being established in the 70s. It was named after Peter Shields, the founder of the campus. Well, we had some very good people on the campus, in science, for instance, and in your field. I remember the people who really helped us quite a bit in the early days were the old-time scholars in agriculture like, Catherine Esau, and Tracy Storer was terrific. Yeah. He'd been chair of the library committee for years. And so there were a number of people like that. Charlie Rick was here by that time. Let's go back to the beginning about Davis, and particularly, I think it was very interesting, the personalities here. and the social life I found very interesting. Because I hadn't lived in a small town for a long time. Still, a lot of people never thought Davis would be anything but a relatively small unit. And I remember Stan Freeborn, whom I liked very much. Stan was an entomologist who moved up to Davis first as provost and then as chancellor from Berkeley. And he was a very fine man, I liked very much, but he never really thought that Davis was going to develop much beyond a few thousand students. In fact, I remember I'd drawn up a plan for how to serve a campus of 5,000 students with an adequate library, and one day I brought it in. Stan looked over my brief statement, and then he turned around in his chair and looked out over the quad. He said, "Dick, we'll never have 5,000 students at Davis."
Key and landmark events in the history of the Davis campus were in 1951 the creation of the Letters and Science College.
Yes.
And then in 1959 the elevation of Davis to a general campus. Mm-hmm. Now, central to this whole growth of the Davis campus was a library that worked.
Yeah,
and
right.
that's where you got into the act again.
Well, I'd like to, just tell a little bit about how we did it. It was since we had nothing practically to begin with, it probably was easier than you would think, because we never had to worry when we bought a collection whether we had any of the material or not. We never did. I took 2 or 3 trips to try to make contact with book dealers. Went to the Eastern book dealers, and they'd never heard of Davis. They only knew of Berkeley and UCLA, and established relations with them and told them what we needed. We were being given fairly good sums of money. And then I went to Europe and also to England and visited book dealers there. But we started acquiring a great many excellent collections just by chance. I remember one of them was the collection of C.K. Ogden. Ogden was, a rather well-known philosopher. He was author of The Meaning of Meaning, and he had this huge private collection. And I think there were 50,000 volumes altogether, terrific collection in history, philosophy, and psychology and related fields. We had to split it up between the campuses. Well, Davis did very well. A lot of very interesting rare books in the collection, including the second folio of Shakespeare, which was issued in 1632, and that was perhaps considered by scholars the best, most reliable early edition of Shakespeare. But the other campuses, we all wanted it. So the Shakespeare folio, very rare, many thousands of dollars in value, was knocked out to the Davis campus, and it formed the basis of our rare book collection at Davis, which is now very good.
Well, now, how did the library acquire the Diderot Encyclopedia, which is a monumental piece of publication?
Well, we bought that separately from a Dutch book dealer. Another terrific collection that was of interest to you particularly was because you, of course, were working on the history of agriculture, was the huge collection, the Higgins collection. A very eccentric guy named Higgins, who had been an agricultural journalist for many years. He had accumulated this huge collection in a warehouse, and he had assembled all the background material on all the agricultural machinery companies in the U.S. and related material, but we didn't have the money for it. Anyway, Roy raised the money from the implement companies, John Deere and several other companies, and we were able to buy it. And then later, the USDA library, knowing of this strength here, decided they'd let us have their collection. So that was transferred to Davis. So we now have have had for many years, the most important collection in the world. And I liked all the chancellors. I liked Stan Freeborn. He was, in spite of being a rather short-sighted about the development of the campus, he was really a great person. But I thought, for me, of all the campus administrators, Emil Merak was tops. And those were great years, the 60s, and Emil was appointed in 1959. Those were very interesting years, the 10 years.
A period of marvelous growth.
Yeah, and the engineering college and the School of Medicine, the law school, were all started during his period, and the campus was really greatly strengthened and enlarged. And of course, Jim Meyer came at a time when a very interesting time also.